So good evening, everyone. Venerable Children is finishing up her time in Singapore, and we're going to review more from Daniel Perdue's book on the Course in Buddhist Reasoning and Debate. But first we'll do our motivation. And in preparing for the class tonight, I came across a few verses from Dharmakirti, who was a 7th century master, along with Dignaga, one of the logicians that really founded the whole way of Buddhist philosophy and reasoning. And the debate format that we're using, that we're studying, that's popular among Tibetan Buddhists, is based largely on his work. But in one of his opening verses for his Pramanavartika, he said, most living beings are attached to the mundane and not endowed with the dexterity of wisdom. Not only are they not interested in excellent teachings, they are hateful, owing to the defilement of envy and so forth. So the implicit meaning of that verse is, don't be like most people, uninterested in excellent teachings and attached to the mundane. Don't be full of jealousy and hatred. Clear that out, like Aryadeva says. Be open-minded, intelligent, interested, and diligent. Make effort to be a proper vessel for the teachings. So in the 7th century, most people were attached to the mundane and not endowed with the dexterity of wisdom. And lo and behold, in the 21st century, the same is true. Possibly even of ourselves. But how amazing that in the midst of all that's going on in this world, the afflictions of living beings are the same now as they were back then, and probably the level of suffering too. I don't know about that. But our capacity to bring about suffering for others has grown with the development of our technology. That not only are, the weapons of war, which we can identify, but even the weapons of our own harsh speech can be spread pretty widely throughout social media and so forth. It can do a lot of damage. And so how extraordinary it is in a world where most living beings are attached to the mundane and not endowed with the dexterity of wisdom, that we have a chance to study these teachings. To study the Buddha's teachings on developing love and compassion. To study about how to, and the reasonings why, not just that we should be good people, but why it's reasonable to develop a heart of bodhicitta. Why it's reasonable to develop the understanding of the nature of reality and how to do it. The causes and conditions that have brought us to this point we can't even imagine. And the conditions will not last. So while we have the opportunity that could end tonight, could end tomorrow, could end in a short time, we don't know. But right now we have the opportunity to deepen our understanding, to cultivate our wisdom, and to apply that wisdom so that we understand why and how to develop our good qualities and eliminate the negative ones. So let's do that tonight, going forward on this text with the wish to do so for the benefit of every living being, to liberate everyone from suffering, including ourselves. So I felt a little bit like I shouldn't even wear my chugu tonight, but I looked at the videos and I saw that the past two reviewers had, so I would do one too. But this is really possibly I don't know about a blind leading the blind, but as you know, here in this room, I'm kind of dropping in from another planet. I have followed these teachings online, and I have now reviewed the teaching on this section a few times. I've appreciated very much Venerable Tarpa and Venerable Supple in their very good reviews the last few weeks. So tonight we're going to go in a slightly different direction, but we will review the chapter. I'm not going to abandon that. But I need to talk a little bit about my own struggle with it, and what I've learned in my time in India. So the first thing I want to do is I want to turn to the Homage to Manjushri in the Blue Book on page 12, for those of you at home who have one. In the debate courtyard, they chant this before the debates. And in the courses that I took, we chanted it. I did it twice every morning in Tibetan. But, it's really, I think, useful. So I didn't have a chance to do, this is a chant that I just have made up years ago. I've been doing this practice for a long time, but we'll see if it flies. But it's better to chant it than to recite it. So I will chant it and follow along with me. And if something like this tune works, we can adopt it or adapt it or throw it out, but we can work on it. So, homage to my guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose intelligence shines forth like the sun, unclouded by the two obscurations, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a parent for his only child, all wanderers caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the stages achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, please illuminate the darkness, and closing my mind, awaken my intelligence and wisdom, that I may gain the insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Om Rapat Sanity, 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 and then in Tibetan they say something like, we will debate in the way that Manjushri did. It's inspiring, I think. So, when I was in India, I had just enough of a taste of a debate to get excited finally, and to realize that I know absolutely nothing about almost anything. One of the classes I took was a course that Geshe Kelsang Wangmo has been teaching for several years now on the Pramanavartika, Dharmakirti's, one of his principal texts on reasoning. And she also had us organized a review class that very few people attended, but I did. And it was taught in debate style. So that really from the get-go, I was sort of thrown into this situation where it says, how many possibilities between impermanent phenomena and functioning thing? Posit it. Well, let's see. How many possibilities? No. Posit it. Posit it. So immediately have to bring to mind what are the definitions of these things and be able to respond quickly. There wasn't like, well, I'm new here. I haven't studied this. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a little bit old. None of that was allowed. It's just like, boom, go for it. And it was really exciting and fun to do. So in the process of doing that, and then also in the process of studying that text, I came to realize something that I never really got before. I mean, Venerable Tarpa probably has, because this whole movement around studying this text is from her long-held aspiration and request that we study it. But somehow I just didn't get what debate had to do with studying Buddhism. I knew it was about sharpening your mind, but what? But what I came to realize is something that Geshe Kelsang Wangmo talked about. She said that in her training in the Geshe program, they get maybe I got this from somebody else. They get an hour and a half or two of teachings, and then they debate it for 4 hours. They debate for about 4 hours every day. They hear a text, they hear a piece of the text, and then they go out in the courtyard and they debate what they heard. They start to listen in terms of syllogisms and reasonings. She said, by the time they've finished that morning's talk, they've already memorized the syllogism because they've learned that that's how they listen. And then they go out in the debate court and they prove to themselves and to each other that this statement is true, with the wish to have an incontrovertible realization or understanding of that point. So now I've been studying Buddhism for a few years, and I've done a lot of analytical meditation over the course of that time. I shouldn't even say a lot. I've done a fair amount given the conditions, but it's not like I'm a great student or a great meditator. And I think I have some understanding of things. But as I began to just do this little teeny bit of applying the logic and reasoning as I was starting to learn it, I began to realize that most of my understanding is pretty much on blind faith. I don't want to undermine or undercut my own practice, but really to develop the kind of sharpness that examines the teachings in the way that this debate process gives us, I think can take us to a whole different level of understanding. And so I wanted to review some of that because I have to say this chapter is tough. Do you agree? It was tough. After I watched it the second time, I thought, oh my gosh, Venerable Children even bailed on the last section. She'll come back to it, but we got to those negatives and it was like, yeah, right? So I wanted for myself, as I was preparing for this, I needed to go back and do some, why are we doing this? What's the point? Because for me, I'm a lazy student, and if I don't get how it's applied, I don't care. It's hard to make myself do something if I don't get the application. And that's not a good quality, but what it does do is it means that I have to go back and contextualize everything. So that's a little bit what I want to start with tonight is some broader context so that it helped motivate me to go forward, and hopefully it will help motivate those people who are going, why am I doing this? There's a really good reason why we're doing it. And I want to help us get inspired about that. Maybe you don't have that problem, but I was having the problem. This debate primer, one of the things I have to say that I appreciate is that debate in the Tibetan tradition is done in Tibetan. So what Daniel Perdue has done and is trying to do, and what those people who are trying to help us debate in English is trying to do is pretty extraordinary. And so that we're wanting to plug away is good for us. But here's a nice text that one of the Geshe students and his mentor has started to develop in English. I brought a couple of these back for our library. But they talk about introduction here. What is debate? It's a method for the precise analysis and examination of our external and internal worlds. It's a fascinating process of inquiry and examination of all things that can be known. It's where the inquisitive and the clever set forth hypotheses for vigorous analysis in the pursuit of wisdom. I thought, well, what if you're not inquisitive and clever? But you become so where both parties work together diligently to use reasoning to dispel the affliction of ignorance impairing us all. So it's about, we see the competition and it looks really kind of ferocious, but it's not about, in any way, about the personal aggrandizement of any of the debaters. Do you remember when Geshe Dadu told us about the story about watering concrete? Vaguely, yeah. It just now came to mind. I didn't look it up. But on the debate court, if monks see a kind of arrogance, they will call each other on it. Because the point is not to be a champion debater, and the point is not to win. The point is to transform our own understanding and to help others. So it's a teamwork process. We work together to dispel each other's wrong views and wrong minds. And what I heard from people who were in the program at IBD, the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, is that because you're on the debate court, it goes very quickly, immediately where people's faults and strengths are becomes apparent. You can't hide it. It's just the way the process is. And so learning to support one another, not going for the weak spot, but finding how to support one another to build that strength up so that you have a greater understanding, so that you have a quicker access to definitions and so forth. So it's a real teamwork sort of thing. And here, I thought this was really sweet, and I thought maybe we could adopt this in our mind. For young monks, and now nuns, the little nuns are doing this too now. Debate offers a fun and challenging way of study. Debate is traditionally done outside, and so for young monks to get out of their dark and stuffy classrooms and go outside for some lively debate study is magical and their favorite part of the day. So I thought, okay, so as I'm slogging through collective predication, if I can imagine being a little monklet, a little nunlet, going outside and enjoying learning in that way, that will help my mind quite a lot. I wrote Venerable Dunyu, our friend that you all online probably remember as John Owen, who was trained at the Abbey for a number of years. He's now been studying at Sarah College for the last 2 years, getting his Tibetan in shape, and he's just moved to Sarah J, where he will continue his Geshe studies. So good for him. But he's been debating for the last 2 years and is really into it. So I wrote him yesterday and I said, give me a reality check. Did you go over collective predication and distributive predication before you started debating? just tell me. No, he said, we didn't learn those distinctions. In fact, I've never heard anyone make either of those two distinctions. People tend to learn the logic of debating by going through it, by being led by their text and teachers and aided by fellow debaters who get the material better. So we gain experience of how language and logic function by using it, so to speak. Then the format and the meaning of the types of statements made become clear. So as much and as valuable as this book is, however, I don't know if people have had debate partners or what, but if we're going to learn this, we have to get on our feet and we have to speak it. We have to say it out. We have to memorize, just through repetition, we have to memorize the formula that's here, and then it'll actually start to be fun because it will make sense because we've said it and we've done it. I know one nun who's in the program at IBD who's Tibetan. I mean, she's been studying Tibetan for a while. Maybe is not all that great. So even not knowing that much Tibetan, she's out there debating. Actually, when Kelsang Wangmo started debating, she didn't know Tibetan at all. They just throw you out there, and you just do it. So it's a very different way of learning than we've done, sitting here being, the nectar of Venerable Children's teachings and all of our guest teachers kind of being poured into us. So this idea of getting up and saying it and doing it is really, really important. And then Dunyo said, basically, debating in this way helps one to see more clearly how the conceptual mind functions. One thing we do as humans in dependence on conceptual minds is we take sense data, we derive an understanding of things that share similar qualities, calling them the same name, and then, we draw conclusions that may or may not be right, that may or may not be correct. So then through the debate process, we begin to analyze how accurate is our conclusion. So one of the things I thought was really helpful, I wish I could have blown this up, but in an early iteration of her work on Dharmakirti's text, Geshe Kelsang Wangmo made a little chart of how it is that we come to understand things through this process of looking at the syllogisms, right? So here's thinker number one with her little thought bubble. She's sitting in her chair. I think the physical body is impermanent. Just examining the nature of phenomena. Well, that's a good thing to think. How strong is that thought? Probably not incontrovertible. Maybe. Maybe a correct assumption. But when a person believes or is convinced the body is impermanent but has not yet realized it, one's debate partner, one's teacher makes a proof statement. Whatever is a product of its own causes and conditions is necessarily impermanent, like the last moment of a candle flame. Likewise, the physical body is also a product of its own causes and conditions. So, the meditator thinks, So they're expressing a correct syllogism, right? So, regarding the subject, the physical body, it is impermanent because it is a product of its own causes and conditions, like the last moment of a candle flame. Well, you think about that. The physical body is impermanent. Really? The physical body is a product of its own causes and conditions. Well, yeah. Something that's a product of its own causes and conditions is impermanent. Well, think about that. My physical body is a product of its own causes and conditions. It must be impermanent. So through that process of looking at the relationship of something that we know with our senses, I can observe that my physical body is a result of its own causes and conditions. Then we come to the inferential understanding that, therefore, it must be impermanent. I realize the physical body is a product of its own causes and conditions, and that whatever is a product of its own causes and conditions is necessarily impermanent. I realize the physical body is impermanent. Now we have an incontrovertible understanding. It came about through this method of reasoning, right? So there's, I want to go to something that she taught about what it means to know something. She said, based on the idea of whatever we try to accomplish, we must first have to have an understanding of it. Even brushing our teeth, we have to know what your toothbrush looks like. So from something as mundane as that to the highest status of existence, everything depends on something, understanding something that actually exists. And because we don't understand how things exist, really, we suffer. She said, we use I know very loosely. Strictly speaking, to know or to understand or to realize something that exists, it has to exist. And you can only know something that does exist, right? So, for example, a planet is either round or square. It can't be both. So you either know one or the other. It comes down to this or that. So everything in Buddhism revolves around the misperception of reality. And so in our practice, we're engaged in removing the misperception of reality. Like, when we look at our own mind, we have all these wrong views and misperceptions, so we take little clues. Somebody walked across the room and didn't smile at me. We take that little clue. We make a story out of it. It becomes our reality. We believe it to be true. We act accordingly in response to it. That person is a jerk. I never liked her anyway. Blah, 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 blah. And we suffer. That doesn't even have to, I mean, that's at the gross level. That has nothing to do really with understanding the nature of reality. But it is how that misunderstanding is one of the ways it helps just like keep us in the state of suffering. So it's incredibly important to understand that we're using reasoning all the time. That is a reasoning. She didn't smile at me, therefore she is a snob. That's a syllogism that we make. But as we begin to understand how to reason, we can look at our own mind and think, is that an accurate, is there a pervasion there? A person who doesn't smile is a snob. A person who does not smile at me doesn't like me. She doesn't like me because she doesn't smile. Is there a pervasion here? She said, everything we do is based on logic, whether we know it or not. Even cleaning our room is based on logic. We don't just throw things around. We have there's a logical thing where things go. So why is everything based on logic? It's based on interdependence. I think this is so brilliantly clear. Things connect. If you do this, that will happen. If A is B, then B also has to be something else. So logic is based on interdependence. Understanding that so understanding logic and getting clear about that, we begin to get clear about what interdependence means and how things are happening. So reasoning allows us to get at and understand things. When we use false reasoning, we come to false conclusions, and we suffer. Like all day long. All day long, we're doing that. So if our understanding is not in accordance with reality, we are bound to hurt ourselves. And if we don't understand things on a deep level, we don't understand how they exist on the deepest level, then that has ramifications on a coarser level. And I just want to point out, before I get off I'll take this point one step further. Venerable Chödrön talks about this too in the introduction to Don't Believe Everything You Think, where she uses a syllogism format just to help us with our afflictions and daily misconceptions, right? She's talked about this many times in our review, but if A is C, well, let's go back to her example. In the syllogism, sound is impermanent because it's a product of causes. Sound is the subject, impermanent is the predicate, and because it is a product of causes is the reason. She's talked about the syllogisms a few times in our teachings for this class. To put it more simply, A is C. Yeah, the subject is A. A is C. C is the reason. If it's C, the reason, it must be B, the predicate. If it's not B, it can't be C. So, she says, let's apply to the syllogism, I'm a bad person because I lied. I is the subject. A. Bad person is the predicate. B. Because I lied is the reason. C. Then we examine. Is it true that I lied? Yes. But is it true that everyone who lies is a bad person? Does one action make someone a bad person? Do thousands of harmful actions make someone a bad person? There is a difference between a harmful action and the person who did it. While the action can be harmful, we can't say that the person who did it is bad. Since everyone has the potential to become a Buddha, how can anyone be a bad person? So here we see that our belief doesn't hold up under analysis. So it's a useful, immediate application of this whole book, which will take us to more profound realizations. But on a day-to-day level, just looking at A is C. If it's C, it must be B. If it's not B, it can't be C. What about the thought, you're a bad person because you don't like me? Does someone liking us make a bad person? Does someone not loving us mean we are defective? Someone not liking or loving us has nothing to do with us. It is a thought in another person's mind. It doesn't make them a bad person either, and on and on and on. It's useful to review this introduction again. So there's an immediate application to what we're doing. So when we get hung up on the terms and the whatever, think about these simple things. Think about these ways that using reasoning really helps us overcome our own suffering, because it helps us unplug our wrong thinking. Helps us overcome our wrong thinking in terms of our own emotional life. Helps improve our relationships with other people because we're not projecting so much on them, or we catch it if we do. And then it also helps us understand the Dharma. I feel like this thing is like falling off my head. Is it?
It's way higher. It's like
Yeah, but these things are falling off. It's a little like having barrettes that are cascading down your, yeah. It's picking me up fine. Great. Okay, I can see it wiggling. But okay, so where we're headed now. Purdue says, syllogisms and consequences are a combination of statements of qualities and statements of pervasion. So, as we know, or we've heard from our philosophical studies, that syllogisms and consequences form the basis of reasoning in the Madhyamaka Prasangika philosophical school that we study pretty extensively. It's called the consequentialist school, right, for a reason, the consequence school. So by learning these parts of a syllogisms, learning syllogisms themselves and learning how to debate, with them we come to understand how to use the reasonings all the way up to the realization of emptiness. So where we left off in this book was on page 83. Now, Venerable Supple gave a very clear and thorough review of statements of qualities, but I think we should review them a little bit because the whole section on statements of pervasion is kind of like is laid out as a comparison. So what did we learn about statements of qualities? First of all, I'll give us some hints. In statements of qualities, there is a subject, a linking verb, and a predicate. The statement says that the predicate is a quality of the subject or an attribute of the subject. For example, this text is difficult to understand. Right? Does that work? Is that okay? The statement may be a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective, which means what, right? So the predicate itself is a noun or an adjective. For example, text is difficult. This tea is strong. What else?
The day is gray.
The day is gray. Okay. And a predicate nominative example would be chai tastes like cinnamon. Yeah, it's a noun. It's a noun. Yeah. No, I want a nominative. Venerable Children is an abbess. Maitri is a cat. I have her later as an example.
An existent is a function.
An existent is a functioning thing. Not necessarily. Not a form of existence is a functioning thing.
Functioning thing is an existent.
Yeah, it goes that way. Okay, the subject may be a concrete singular term or an abstract singular term, which means what? Oh, yeah, sorry, you didn't need to use the microphone. Yeah, I'll repeat it. Concrete is in the room. Yeah, it's a thing. I don't know if it's in the room, but it's, yeah. Concrete is in the thing. For example, the microphone is expensive. Yeah, that'll work. Abstract singular term means the subject is abstract, which means you only know it by a mental consciousness, by a mental, what's the actual word? Mental consciousness, yeah, I guess. For example, sound is an impermanent thing. Democracy is in danger. Yeah, like that.
Yes.
Like that, okay. We also learned the term collective predication, which means
The predicate applies to the subject as a single object.
almost. The predicate says something about the subject as a collective whole. Yeah. So it is a single object, but it is a collective. For example, forest is a large part of the Abbey. The forest is a large part of the Abbey. Yeah, why not? Why not? The forest is a collective whole. Yeah. I thought the chair as an impermanent phenomenon was easier. But that was good. Okay, then distributive predication means, yeah, the predicate says something about each and every occurrence of the subject. For example,
could I take something like forests comprise a large part of America's landscape?
forests comprise a large part of America's landscape. Distributive predication. Forests are.
Everything that is the subject. So like the chairs are from forests.
Forests are part of the landscape. Sure. Yeah.
Whoever is a voter is necessarily a human being.
Let's hope so. Yeah, whoever's a voter is necessarily a human being. Which is directly into statement of pervasion, right there. So regarding this distinction, Venerable Dunyo also said in his email, this distinction between statement of qualities and perversions is helpful to make because it's one of the biggest areas of confusion and difficulty for new students. It surprised me for him to say that, but again, I haven't done it on my feet, so I don't really know. But it says that people get it after a while, but it's difficult. Like his example is a little bit hard, but they come to understand that just because X is Y, or phenomena is permanent, phenomena as a class is permanent, doesn't mean that whatever is X is necessarily Y. If something is a phenomena, it doesn't follow that it's necessarily permanent. Right? You get his example. So, good. Let's go to the text. Statements of Pervasion, page 83. In this system of debate, I'm just going to read through the things that, how are we doing time-wise? That I underlined or that Venerable Children emphasized, and I'm going to skip some of the things that we'll cover. I think we'll cover it fairly well. Statements of qualities are never intended to say something distributively about a subject, about each and every occurrence of that subject. On the other hand, statements of pervasion always say something distributively about each and every occurrence of a phenomenon. That's what we just said in going through the review. So that's the tip-off right there. I mean, the biggest tip-off. Statements of qualities are never intended to say something distributively about the subject, whereas in pervasion, that's really what it means. Each and every subject is pervaded by this. Sanskrit vyapti, Tibetan kyapa, means to spread throughout, covered by, filled with, completely occupied by, universally penetrated by, pervades. And pervasion means every member of this group is filled with this quality. For example, whatever is a material object is necessarily impermanent. When we say that whatever is a material object is necessarily impermanent, it means that every single thing that is a material object is impermanent. And there are two main ways to say this. Does he say that right here? Yeah. Whatever is a P is necessarily a Q. Meaning whatever is a cat is necessarily a mammal, for example. And then if something is a P, then it is necessarily a Q. If something is a cat, it is necessarily a mammal. So in a couple of pages, he has a long list of other ways that you can say statements of pervasion that I think was somewhat confusing when what we're boiling down to is this is what we're going to use, is these two statements. The rest we can turn our ears to. So we're already familiar with pervasion from this text. If we go back to page 47, spiders and arachnids. How do the two spiders and arachnids compare? There are three possibilities between a spider and an arachnid. It follows that there are not three possibilities between a spider and arachnid. Give an example of something that is both a spider and an arachnid. There is something, the subject, a black widow. Now, which way does the pervasion go? Anything that is a black widow is necessarily a spider, but anything as a spider is not necessarily a black widow. No, arachnid, sorry. Yeah. Whatever is a spider, whatever is a black widow spider, is necessarily an arachnid. But whatever is arachnid is not necessarily. Huh? Oh, yeah. Okay, use the two that you're comparing. Great, thank you. The point is, not clearly made if I can't do the example correctly, but the point is we've already looked at this. We've already studied pretty thoroughly and practiced whatever is a spider is necessarily an arachnid, but whatever is an arachnid is not necessarily a spider. So we've been introduced to it and we've practiced it, and so now he's more fully explaining what that means, because it's crucial to understand this point. There's a footnote on page 84 that's important. It follows from this bottom paragraph, almost bottom paragraph. For any correct pervasion, the range of the P phenomena must be equal to or smaller than the range of the Q phenomenon. Meaning, this is where the footnote's important, the range of phenomena is all the things that have the quality of that phenomenon. Oops, I forgot to draw this. So in order for the pervasion to work, for the correct pervasion to work, it either has to be mutually inclusive or such that what did you call it when there's one outside and one inside? Yeah, it is three possibilities, but the P phenomena must be the smaller range of the Q phenomena, and I meant to draw a circle. Somebody got a piece of paper and could do that real quick, 2 circles. Thanks, because on paper, it's the only way, yeah, but let me do the other one too. It's the only way a pervasion can go. There's only 2 ways a pervasion can go. P, Q, P, Q. Right? You can't see them, but I know they're there. Okay, so this is the mutually inclusive. They are mutually pervaded, you could say. Pervade to me is like little rays, right? So here, P is pervaded by being Q. If this is the P is the pervaded. Yes, P is the pervaded. How do we know that? Because it's inside, everything that's inside this thing. But it doesn't pervade Q because it's only a little piece of it.
So the P in that would be the spider, the Q would be the arachnids.
Yes, spider. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, that looks like a tick. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ticks are also arachnids. So this is the arachnid. This is Charlotte the spider here. Okay, arachnids. Looks like a big fat tick. And the spider is here.
Why have you drawn those lines?
This is their legs.
Really, have 6 with X's instead of all the little spiders have 6 all these spiders.
Yeah, little spiders. What?
Spiders have 6.
They have 8.
6.
8.
6.
8.
8. Whatever.
Whatever is a spider has 8 legs.
Bones have 6.
Whatever has 8 legs is not necessarily a spider, because a tick also has 8 legs. Okay, so what the statement says, this is important. What pervades what? Is this clear? How that works? P's and Q's and so forth? Okay. P has to be smaller or equal to C for it to be pervaded by. Predicate pervades the reason? Is that right? Or the reason has to pervade whatever is C is necessarily B.
Predicate must pervade either mutually or the 3 possibilities.
Whatever is B is necessarily C, but whatever is C is not.
Whatever is C is necessarily B,
Oh,
not B, not C.
okay. Whatever.
A is C.
A is C. A is C. Whatever is C is necessarily B.
It's not B, it can't
It's not B, it can't be C. Yeah, I know. Which is bigger?
Keep this on a microphone or we're having conversations.
Okay, thanks. Thus, the range of the P phenomena, cats, inside, the range of the P phenomena, spiders, is smaller than the range of the Q phenomena, arachnids. These are the only two patterns of pervasion that could work in an accurate statement of pervasion. Okay, if something is a P, then it is a Q. If something is a torus, then it is necessarily a Ford.
Or a mammal.
Or a sign of the zodiac.
Good point. That won't work. Okay. She's a Gemini. She's a Taurus. That's beside the point. That something is a P, so these are different phrases. That something is a P implies that it is a Q. So that something is empty implies that it is a dependent arising, for example. Okay. It seems, so he gives this whole list of ways that things are said in English, but it seems that the most prevalent ways of stating a pervasion in ordinary English are all cats are mammals, every cat is a mammal, and cats are mammals. Okay, so let's go to what statements of pervasion imply. Page 87. Here the word imply, this is a footnote, does not just mean hints at or suggests, but has the sense of flows logically from. And I was looking for this. I don't know, Venerable Sepul or Venerable Tarpa, you may know this, but this word implies, and that something flows logically from, suggests to me the term, then it follows that. Do you think, no? You don't think there's, follows implies a consequence. Okay, so it is an implication, but it's not an implication here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, thanks. Then forget what I just said. Statements of pervasion imply other statements of pervasion. So this is tricky. He says here, by performing mere mechanical transformations, we can precipitate several statements from any statement of pervasion that must be true if the initial statement is true. For example, take our standard all P's are Q's, all cats are mammals. By a process called obversion, in which the quality of this positive sentence all is changed to the negative no, the subject remains the same in both statements, and the predicate becomes the contradictory of the original predicate this statement implies. That is, no P's are non-Q's, no cats are non-mammals. Taking the immediately preceding statement and changing it by a process called conversion, in which we simply reverse the order of the subject and predicate in this statement, the obverted statement above implies no non-Q's are P's, no non-mammals are cats, and so forth. So what I take this whole obversion, conversion thing to mean is how we get to the contrapositive, which, when Venerable was teaching this, she kind of reduced this. This leads to the contrapositive, that you can go directly to it through the law of contrapositive, which he says, generating the contrapositive directly from the original statement. So this leap about needing to obvert and convert, I'm not sure why it's here. Venerable said, simply put, switch the places of P and Q and negate them both. Well, maybe he says this. You can do this because the original statement and the contrapositive are logically equivalent. One is true if and only if the other is true. The person is empty because of being a dependent arising. What's the pervasion? If it's a dependent arising, then it must be empty. What's the contrapositive? The person is empty because of being a dependent arising. If it's the reason, dependent arising, then it's going to be the predicate, empty. Therefore, she said, turn it around. If it's not empty, then it's not a dependent arising. Do you get the progression there? To me, that's more intuitive and easier to follow than obversions and conversions. So we check it. The person is empty because of being a dependent arising. Okay, we think about that. If it's the reason, dependent arising, then it's going to be the predicate, empty. Yeah. So then we turn it around. If it's not empty, then it's not a dependent arising. That makes sense? She said that's all the contrapositive is. You have your subject, your reason, and your pervasion. The pervasion is, if it's the reason, it's the predicate. And you have to test that. You turn those two, negate them both. If it's not empty, then it's not a dependent arising.
Isn't that just the same as if it's C, it's B. If it's not B, it's not C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to be, right? And she also says if the original pervasion is true, the counter pervasion is true. So if you're testing, you don't really have to do the counter pervasion. And I've heard this many times, so why it's always included as an important part and then you're told you don't have to do it, I don't know. But I assume that when you're in practice, when you're doing it, it will be clear when you need to do it and when you don't. The person, yeah, the person. So I'm not going to go into the negatives because we didn't finish that section and it was too hard. But I thought it would be interesting to go through some statements of qualities and statements of pervasion and identify which is which, and then how we might turn statements of qualities into statements of pervasion. For example, if we use his example, a cat is a mammal. To turn that into a statement of pervasion, we would say anything that is a cat is necessarily a mammal. Now, is anything that is a mammal necessarily a cat? No, so it doesn't reverse. So what is this one? Whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Statement of pervasion. What does it imply? Whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. It implies a statement of qualities. A product is impermanent. Right? The syllogism, the statement of pervasion implies that statement of qualities. That's how they feed each other. Okay, anger is a mental affliction. What is that? A mental affliction. Statement of qualities. How would you turn that into a statement of pervasion? Yes. Whatever is anger is necessarily a mental affliction. Is that the word Venerable uses now? I couldn't remember. No, she isn't. Affliction, just affliction. Whatever is anger is necessarily an affliction. Which way does the pervasion go? Obviously, that's the way it goes. Is whatever is an affliction necessarily anger? Negative action brings a suffering result. Sounds like a statement of qualities. It sounded like that to me too, but I wasn't sure. A negative action brings a suffering result. Brings, yeah. Somewhere there's a list of movement verbs that are also included, and I couldn't find it. Yeah.
Yeah, because
becomes, yeah. Negative action, no. If it is a statement at all, it's a statement of qualities. Whatever is a negative action brings a suffering result, necessarily brings a suffering result. That's a statement of pervasion. Yes. Are those two mutually inclusive? I don't know. Well, that's a good point. You could purify it. So negative actions don't necessarily bring a suffering result, but because you could purify it is what she said. I don't know. Maybe I messed this up there. Wherever there is smoke, there is necessarily fire. That's a safe one. That's a statement of pervasion. What does it imply? Smoke comes from fire. Where there is smoke, there is fire. Smoke exists with fire. What was the question? Yeah, but what was your question? No, okay. Chairs have seats. Chairs have seats, a statement of qualities. How do we turn? No.
Chairs implies all chairs. It's a statement of pervasion.
Statement of pervasion. Chairs have seats. Statements of pervasion. What do you think? Qualities pervasion. Or whatever is a chair is necessarily has a seat. Yeah, that's definitely a pervasion. Chairs have seats. It's pervasion. Yeah. Whatever is an impermanent phenomena is necessarily a functioning thing. That's a statement of pervasion. Yes? Yes, those two things are mutually inclusive. What does it imply? That impermanent phenomena are functioning things, or an impermanent phenomena is a functioning thing. Yes. Okay, a nun is female. Statement of quality. How do we make that into a pervasion? Whatever is a nun is necessarily a female. Is whatever a female is necessarily a nun? Sadly, no. I'm kind of a born-again nun. What can I say? An existent. What's the counter pervasion? What's the counter pervasion to that? Whatever is a nun is necessarily a female. What's the counter pervasion? Whatever is not a female is necessarily not a nun. No nuns are non-females. No nuns are non-females. That's a funny way of saying it. No nuns are non-females. It's like a campaign slogan. No nuns are non-females. Yes. An existent may be said to be an object of knowledge. An existent may be said to be an object of knowledge. That is a statement of qualities. Yeah. When a non-existent is being described. So an existent may be said to be an object of knowledge is a statement of qualities. So does this pervasion work? Whatever is an existent is necessarily an object of knowledge. Yes, those are mutually inclusive. And whatever is an object of knowledge is necessarily an existent. Okay. The cat Maitri is a feline. And the pervasion? I don't think so. Whatever is the cat Maitri is necessarily a feline, but whatever is Maitri is not necessarily a feline. Whatever is Maitri. So this, getting explicit, this is also where we really have to pay attention to being very explicit about what we mean. Precise, yeah. Whatever is a concord is necessarily a grape. Whatever is the Concord grape is necessarily a grape. It's also a jet. It's also, it's a kind of jet. A cup is a tassa. Statement of qualities. What if I said cups are tassas? Tassin. Oh, sorry. Tassin. Thank you. Cups are Tassen. That turns it into a statement of pervasion, doesn't it? Tasse is the German word for cup.
A big clue is that if the subject is plural, it cannot be a statement of qualities.
Yep, that's a good clue. He says that early. He said that it's pretty clear. I think in the section on subjects of qualities, he says that if it's plural, it's generally. I would hesitate to make that a rule, but generally it seems that if it's plural, it's a statement of pervasion in English. And if it's singular, it's a statement of qualities. Okay, last one. Love is a consciousness. Statement of qualities. How do we make that a pervasion? Statement of pervasion. Whatever is love is necessarily a consciousness. It's a little bit hard to think about, isn't it? Love is a consciousness, but it's true. Whatever is love is necessarily a consciousness. What do you object on the basis of? On the grounds that?
We have a cat named Maitri,
Uh-huh.
all right? And you wouldn't let her stand because it was a proper name.
Uh-huh.
Now, I've met animals that have been named Love,
Actually, I had a great aunt named Love.
so it's not necessarily a consciousness.
Okay, fair enough. The mental factor of love is necessarily a consciousness. Thank you very much. The mental factor of love is necessarily a consciousness. So whatever is the mental factor of love is necessarily a consciousness. Whatever there is a consciousness is necessarily the mental factor of love? No. No. But to even make statements that describe what the mental factors are, it's helpful. We have a vast, many ideas of what love is. There's 3 songs just leapt into my mind, right?
Mental factor is not one of the things.
Right.
Inspires wrong views.
It inspires wrong views. The mental factor of love is a consciousness. Okay, I think we've covered this material. What do you think? And I think it actually was helpful. That's my hope. It was my wish, my aspiration. But yeah, I really think my biggest takeaway from my own review here is that doing debate is something that is done out loud with the body and with the voice and with the mind. And that just poring over a book. Actually, someone I know who's been studying has read this book, is reading this book. She said, I love reading this book. As a good read, it's quite beautifully written. It is. Many parts of it. But she said, you'll never learn to debate from reading this book. It's true. So he's giving us hints and ideas, and he's also giving, I think Venerable pointed this out, he's giving a lot of theory up front that on the debate court you wouldn't get. You'd get from learning. And maybe from asking a question somewhere along the line, you might think, oh, is this distributed predication? Probably not, but but we're learning in a different way. But we will need to get on our feet, and the next section is on syllogisms. When Venerable comes back, we'll finish this chapter and get on to syllogisms so that we'll be able to, with greater facility, talk about if A is B, then it must be C, or wrong. A is B. A is C. A is C. If C, it must be B. Yeah, necessarily. Not B, it's not C. A is C. A is C. And I kept getting in trouble with trying to mess with the subject. You don't mess with the subject. The subject is just the subject. And we're trying to prove, and we're trying to, yeah.
I remember hearing this several times that in the monasteries they say that 25% of our learning comes from the teacher and 75% comes from your fellow students, because they're the ones you're out debating with and really learning the material with.
Yeah.
So we need each other. We're dependent.
Yeah, very much so. So it sounds exciting to open up a kind of a different avenue for if we stick with it and practice.